Good morning, everybody. Anybody not ready? All right, we're going to go ahead and begin, and we're here this morning to announce arrests of a significant racketeering organization that operated here in Pinellas County that was led by Shane Adams. As I begin to go through what happened and synopsize the investigation for you, we're here today as a result of a lot of hard work by detectives within our economic crimes unit, great cooperation from Lowe's and from Home Depot, and by members of the Pinellas Pasco State Attorney's Office to put together a very complex case that took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of work. So it's to their credit that we're here today and able to announce these charges. And as you'll see, probably one of the more significant things about this case, about this investigation, is it involves some serious exploitation of elderly people, and that Adams had absolutely no regard at all, and total disregard for these people in their 70s and their 80s, and in many cases, as I'll describe to you, they described that they were terrorized by him and forced to give their credit card numbers so that he could engage in this fraudulent activity and these thefts with an extensive amount of money over a pretty significant period of time of a few years. So I'll go ahead and synopsize this for you as to what happened. In 2012, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office received some information from Home Depot that stolen credit cards were being used to buy expensive power tools at various Home Depot stores throughout Pinellas County. The suspects were ordering these tools by phone, using a credit card, and picking up the items at the stores. The individuals would then return those items that were ordered with a credit card, and it was a stolen credit card number that was being used, and return them to the stores and receive cash and or gift cards. When they got gift cards, they would then be sold at various pawn shops for about 50 cents on the dollar. The group used a number of different individuals, runners, people who were involved, and what I'm talking about here is what's laid out in phase one of the investigation. And there were different people who went to the stores to pick the items up, and different people who would then go in and get the gift cards or the cash in exchange. In 2012, Home Depot changed its return policy because of situations like this that were occurring, and to combat this type of fraud, limiting the refunds to $500 and requiring positive identification from people when they wanted to come in and do these exchanges and refunds. So that threw a little bit of a wrench into it for the organization, but nonetheless, they still were able to adapt and continue. There were about 7 people at this time back in 2012 that investigators learned and determined who were involved in this whole scheme to defraud led by Shane Adams. At the same time as Adams was doing this, he engaged in a business of selling magazines, especially to elderly people. And what he would do, and this is how he exploited these elderly people, is he would have contact with them. And as you can see here, we've identified at least, and there's a lot more unfortunately, but 19 victims who are all in their 60s to mid 80s. And he'd have contact with these people and literally harass them, berate them to the point where they just gave him their credit card numbers. And when he took their credit card numbers, he would then use those, as I described to you, to order these various items from Lowe's and Home Depot. And in this first phase of this was primarily Home Depot that he was doing this, but he was using these elderly people's credit card numbers. As I said, a lot of them felt terrorized by him. In this first phase, we know that the amount well exceeded $75,000 of transactions, and that's just what was able to be established. Unfortunately, there's a lot more than that, but in the first phase, they were able to show $75,000 worth of fraudulent transactions. Adams went to jail, actually to prison, in February of 2013 on unrelated drug charges, and he was released in July of 2013. Upon his release from prison, Adams recruited others, including these people who are now listed here in phase 2, and it includes East and Laney, McKinney, Wallace, McCaslin, and Moreland to participate in this racketeering organization and this fraudulent activity. But they changed what they were doing. They also now targeted not only Home Depot, but Lowe's as well. And because of these property policy return changes, they changed what they were doing. And they began, instead of buying the high-end power tools they were using back here in phase one, they largely now began buying appliances. And they came up with this concocted story that they would tell contractors, primarily here in Pinellas County. They would tell these contractors, and Adams would tell these contractors, that he had a business partner and that they had a line of credit within the business. The business was getting ready to go under, and because he's a fine, upstanding businessman and a real scrupulous guy, yeah, he wasn't, he told these people that he was going to max out the credit line and then declare bankruptcy. So that's the kind of the scam that he was giving these people, so they would buy these high-end appliances that he was getting from Home Depot and Lowe's on these old people's credit cards, so that they would be okay with buying it for 60 cents on the dollar. So you got a lot of contractors that knew that they were probably doing something wrong, but they didn't know that it was anything other than his effort to rack up this credit and then declare bankruptcy. The contractors weren't aware that the real scam was to exploit these elderly people, intimidate them into give their credit card numbers, order the appliances, in essence steal them from Home Depot and Lowe's, and then sell them for 60 cents on the dollar. Detectives were able to conduct various surveillances throughout Pinellas County and observe several members of the organization as they made these purchases and then delivered the items to the contractors. It became obvious that the criminal activity needed to stop, even as investigators were in the process of putting all this together, because again, it's a very complex case. A lot of work needed to be done in coordination with the state attorney's office. So Adams was originally arrested on a scheme to defraud charge, and most recently, though, on September 21st of 2015, he was charged with the first-degree felony of racketeering involving 104 different predicate acts, dealing in stolen property, grand theft involving a victim over age 65, and criminal use of personal identification. These other defendants were arrested this week, one as recently as yesterday. A couple of them are already in custody, and the additional charges will be added. During the second phase of the operation, the organization is known and documented to be responsible for about $98,000 in fraudulent transactions, and there are about 150 separate documented incidents totaling $174,000 between phase one and phase two. But because this organization operated, we know, for over 3 years, we believe that the total amount involved exceeded well over $800,000 in fraudulent transactions over that period of time. There were 19 of these elderly victims, as I mentioned to you earlier, ranging in age from 65 to 89 years old. One of the things we want to reiterate to the public is to be very careful when you are contacted by people who are especially asking for your credit card numbers, and when somebody's pressuring and pushing and to the point where you feel exploited, you probably are being exploited, and to call law enforcement to report it and don't communicate with these people, because Adams' success was because he was a bully and because he was able to get these credit card numbers from these elderly people. Without that, he wouldn't have been able to affect the scheme. The scam only worked because he had these legitimate credit card numbers and then was able to use them at Home Depot and Lowe's, and then concoct his story in the latter part with the contractors. So again, it was a lot of work. People put a lot of time and effort within the state attorney's office, within our economic crimes unit, to put all this together. It's now into the prosecution phase, but we're confident that it's a very solid case, and that our detectives and the assistant state attorney have been successful and able to dismantle a pretty significant criminal organization that was exploiting elderly people within Pinellas County. So with that, I'll